This episode of Policing Matters is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support, and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com. Imagine that you were involved in a routine traffic stop where eventually you've made an arrest, where you had to use force to fight off or restrain the person. It turns out fine, and you book or cite the individual. You write the report, all done, right? Well, imagine you get home and you watch the news and you see your incident leading the news. Quote, community member attacked by police, or police beat council member, end quote, or some other media soundbite that totally distorts the reality of what actually happened. Well, if we don't respond, the narrative is left there to linger. My guest today wrote a book that dispels some of the myths about famous or infamous incidents that have been lingering for years in the public perception as reality. Well, you're listening to Policing Matters on policeone.com, and I'm your host, Jim Dudley. Welcome back. Hopefully, you're checking us out on the podcast or as a YouTube where you can see my guest. Well, our guest today is Greg Meyer, retired LAPD captain and author of his new book, Hard Cases, Police Use of Force in America. And there's a subset of 4 particular cases that you're probably familiar with. Well, welcome to Policing Matters, retired Los Angeles police captain, Greg Meyer.
Well, thanks very much, Jim. Pleasure to be here. Here's the book. And after 4 years of chipping away at it, finally got it published a few weeks ago. I appreciate being on your show.
Yeah, great. So, I'm always interested to hear about cops who write books about something they may be involved in or that they've taken time to dissect, especially when, in the popular news media, we might get a soundbite or two, or we'll definitely get video if there's video. You served a long, distinctive career with the LAPD. What motivated you to write this book?
It was during the George Floyd trials. I was an expert witness for one of the rookie officers, Thomas Lane, in that trial. I worked 160 hours pro bono, no charge, on that case on his behalf. And in the middle of the trials, it just occurred to me, I've been involved, fortunately or unfortunately, lucky enough, I guess, to be involved in some major cases, Rodney King, George Floyd, several others. And I should write a book. There's a lot of lessons to be learned here. There's a lot of myths and misinformation out there. So I said, okay, I'm going to write it. I want to provide factual information that contrasts with media-driven myths and misinformation for these famous cases. And I wanted to examine quite a few controversial but common police tools and tactics that we use in use of force situations with an eye towards improving the outcomes. And I wanted to enhance public understanding of the role of police officers when they confront resisting suspects. So there's the hard cases. They're out there now and then. Everybody knows the names, the big national news ones. There's video evidence, there's intense media coverage, there's issues of trust or distrust of the police. The police policy and training issues are always there, and race issues are sometimes there. So it's an exciting subject. I just decided, well, my life's work has been about this, so I might as well write a book and bother everybody else with it.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's really admirable. I know so many cops, they're done with policing and they walk off the job and never look back. I do admire people like you that are trying to enhance public perception and give them a look behind the screen. Too many times we'll see a sheriff or a chief that will back away from these kinds of issues, and really it does a disservice to the officers involved. And then, after a long drawn out court case, maybe when maybe some of the facts are revealed, still leaves a sour taste in the mouths of those cops. You
Sure
wrote
does.
about Yeah, you wrote about some extreme cases of, quote, police brutality, cases that involved Rodney King, Oscar Grant, George Floyd that you just mentioned. How did you approach, where'd you start telling each one of these?
Well, in each of the chapters, I've got a chapter on Rodney King. I've got a chapter on the Oscar Grant tragedy. That's the one not everybody immediately recognizes the name Oscar Grant all these years later, but this was the BART shooting uh, in Oakland, California, on the train platform, where the officer mistakenly drew his gun when he meant to draw his taser. And there was a fatal shooting. The officer was tried for murder. I was his expert witness case in that murder case for the officer. Everybody knows about George Floyd. I would imagine most of your readers, even if they weren't born back then, have heard of the Rodney King incident. These are the big cases, and of course there's more, and there's going to be more because that's the nature of the business. But the way I approach each case in writing the chapter about it, I say, okay, we know a lot of the answers here about who was involved, what happened, when it happened, where it happened, how it happened, but the thing that really motivated me to write the book, and about these cases in particular, is the media doesn't often ask, and people in general don't often ask, why did this happen? Why is it's rarely asked. It's the most important question. Why did the officers do what they did? So I wanted to answer the why question. So how I did it was, for each hard case, I gave an overview of the incident, and then I would explain how did I get involved, and then go deep into why it happened. And in doing that, I provide a lot of insider information that the media never reported on, either because they didn't know the facts or they didn't understand what they were looking at. They didn't understand what the real issues were. So I challenge the misinformation that are out there. And in many cases, I correct the record, because there is a false media record out there on some of these cases.
Yeah, for sure. And some have spurred international attention and even movements. Ferguson, Missouri is famous for the hands up, don't shoot false
Oh, yeah.
narrative. We saw newscasters, sports figures, celebrities all show the hands up silhouette. I'm not even going to do it, but is it possible to reverse the damage and negative image of policing that resulted from these kinds of movements? And I mean, every cop is out there, stomach churning, knowing it's a false narrative, but nobody is standing up to tell the real story.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned the hands up, don't shoot down there in Ferguson all those years ago. That's been a myth since day one. Number one, it didn't happen. The guy didn't have his hands up and say, "Don't shoot." Okay, that was a politically driven thing. You got to remember, in that case, even under President Obama's Department of Justice, which took a hard look at that tragic case, they did not charge the officer because the evidence was not there of excessive force. And yet there was riots, yet there was a big political movement with the false hands up, don't shoot narrative, and those things are what happened. How do you try to reverse the damage when there's this negative image of policing after an incident? It's been a pendulum. The pendulum swings back and forth for at least several decades. You have strong support for law enforcement that gives way to condemnation because of a big front page case where, oh my gosh, the cops did the wrong thing there, even though that hasn't been proven and the investigation hasn't even been done yet. And the pendulum swings back maybe in the last couple of years for greater support for law enforcement. We seem to be getting in a better place lately. There's more pro-law enforcement laws being passed in some places. But the next hard case can come anytime, and the pendulum will swing the wrong way again. So I think, how do you combat that? I think it's important for police leadership to keep pointing out the good things that our officers do every day. And there's thousands of officers doing thousands of good things every day. And then when something goes south, the same police leaders need to be honest in their public statements. Honest, and if their mistake is made, it's important to be honest that a mistake was made, because that can improve public trust. Ultimately, public trust seems to be a function of what the media focuses on, because that's all anybody really knows about a case is what they see on the CNN or on the internet, social media, all that.
Mhm.
They don't really know the facts of the case, and but their trust level for the police is affected by these things that they hear and believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you take both sides of the perspective, you have sheriffs and chiefs that are waiting for results. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to jump to a conclusion or blindly um, maybe defend their cops. Uh, but who else? Who can be an ally? Can we have the coroner, the medical examiner, independent police advocates, use of force experts? Who should step up to the podium and say, look, toxicology is a week away. We're going to get DNA, especially in Ferguson, when after the fact, I mean, months later,
Right.
there's DNA from the suspect in the officer's vehicle. There's DNA on his firearm. So, Officer Clark, I believe his defense was, "Hey, he's being attacked by this guy. He's trying to pull his service weapon out of its holster." That's all vindicated after. Well, I don't even know if it's vindicated, but it's shown to be to support his statements, but months after the fact. Who can we rely on to step forward in that immediate interim?
Yeah, it's tough. What happens in all these big cases, like Ferguson, like Rodney King, like George Floyd, et cetera. It's clear that intense media coverage is a major factor. So when a controversial police video becomes public, the social media, television media, they're off to the races. The investigation's hardly even started yet. Print newspapers these days are, way behind the curve. They compared to the electronic media, they follow along as best they can. But the public is immediately treated to first impressions, conjectured opinions by social media followers, pundits from different political persuasions that appear on local and cable news stations. And the news stations themselves these days very often seem to be more politically driven than journalism driven. So who pushes back? I think it's important for the police leaders to be upfront in the media, explain what they can about the incident without getting ahead of the investigation, without compromising the investigation, but telling the truth as best they know it. And because false rumors are flying around, and it's important for a police leader, maybe a mayor. You mentioned a coroner. Once there's some evidence developed, to get out there and say, no, it didn't happen that way. It happened this way. That was false information. Here's the truth. So they need to push back to the extent they can when they get the facts and that they can present to the media. But the problem's not going to change. The media is always in a hurry. Sometimes the truth gets buried by the rumors. And later, when the real facts come out, days, weeks, months later, the media seems slow to correct the record. And sometimes they never correct the record. It's a challenge. But people in leadership positions, whether it's the law enforcement officials or political officials, need to push back as best they can with the facts they got. When the officers are right, back the officers up.
Yeah, 100% with you. Hey, I want to ask you about the cases that you detail in the book and how and why you chose those. But first, I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsor. Lexipol empowers first responders and public servants to best meet the needs of their residents safely and responsibly. Serving more than 2 million public safety and government professionals in over 8,000 agencies and municipalities, Lexipol offers a range of solutions that includes policies, training, behavioral health resources, news and analysis, and grant assistance services for law enforcement, fire and rescue, EMS, local government, and other agencies dedicated to public safety. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com. And we're back, and I'm speaking with Greg Meyer, retired LAPD captain and author of his new book, Hard Cases, Police Use of Force in America. Greg, you've been around a long time, and you have to remember that policing used to keep a lot from the public as far as policies and procedures. How can we do more to educate the public on important issues such as use of force? Sometimes it doesn't come to light. And, I'm thinking right now about George Floyd and how the misnomer of the carotid uh, restraint was used when in fact it wasn't at all, but it
Yeah.
didn't keep over 600 law enforcement agencies from discontinuing its use. And we lose this valuable tool. I've used the carotid restraint at least a dozen times in my career, uh, and it's gone now. How do we fight back or push back on the legislative groups that say we've got to, take away this, harmful tactic that police are using?
You know, this is a big point I address in the book, and I use the carotid on the street a lot. The carotid, all neck restraints were taken away from LAPD officers clear back in 1982, 9 years
Wow.
before the Rodney King incident. And I have a chapter in there, it's chapter 13, called in my book called Neck Restraints, Chokeholds, and Other Types. It's a big mistake that's been happening to take these, if they're properly used, neck restraints are more humane and more effective than just about anything else we can do against a subject doing active resistance. And I spend a lot of time in the book basically, proving that. And what, for example, LAPD, if you look at 1982 when the politicians took away the neck restraints, and all of a sudden batons, nightsticks, and karate kicks became and to some extent the tasers, although we didn't have enough of them in those days, those became the go-to uh, tools of choice upon encountering resistance. And it's like, well, within the first year after the change, after the takeaway of the neck restraints, the chief of police produced a report to the city council that showed that injuries to suspects dramatically climbed. Injuries to officers dramatically climbed. And the chief requested a modification of the policy to go back to use the carotid control hold in some instances. And it was denied. And so here we are out there using batons aggressively instead of defensively, using karate kicks aggressively instead of defensively. Finally, the Rodney King video comes along because some guy across the street filmed part of the incident and the world went crazy. I believe seriously that on these agencies that have had their neck restraints taken away, whether it was years ago or recently in the wake of the George Floyd case, that if there was a study of before and after regarding the injuries to officers and suspects, then people would see the light. Oh, maybe it was a mistake to take these away. And then it would be in the interests of law enforcement leaders, law enforcement unions, et cetera, to go to the legislators at whatever level that took them away and say, look what's happened since you took these away. It's just inhumane to have more injuries than less injuries. And you would like to think that people would listen to reason like that. Best I
Yeah,
can
I think
that.
yeah, I think there's some that are so intent on that just the look of it, right? That they want to take it away. I know there was I can't remember which agency, but there was a study in the Northwest that looked at over 600 cases of the carotid use, no deaths. And
Right.
I think those advocates that are looking to pull that aspect of use of force from police. They narrow the options that a police officer has from open-handed tactics to firearms. So, when we take away these force options, it just narrows that hand to gun uh, continuum. I hate using the word continuum, but uh, it just shortens it up. And in San Francisco, my old agency, we never had the taser, so we're
I
already
know.
starting from a deficit. So you make a good point there, and you talk a little bit about Rodney King, and even in the case of Oscar Grant, because there was video. There's video aspects. I mean, King was so far away; it was a video camera. It's grainy footage, but we see, what's happening. Will body worn cameras help tell more of the story?
Well, yeah, I think body worn cameras tell part of the story. I'm very much in favor of body worn cameras. I think the overwhelming majority of time they show the officers doing their jobs uh, correctly, but those are not the videos, the body worn videos that you see on the media. The media will pick up on the ones that look like there's a problem. And so the general public doesn't see video after video of officers doing their jobs well. What they see is a difficult incident. So body worn cameras, just by their nature, they tell part of the story. They have limitations. They're not always pointed at the action. They're not pointed at what the officer eyes are looking at, because the officer turns
Mhm.
their head this way or that way, and the camera's pointing that way. The cameras have a wider angle of view than the officer's eyes, and so the camera will pick up things that the officer didn't even see. When you ask them about their interview, no, I didn't see that. And then people say, oh, well, he must be lying if he didn't see that. It's right there on camera, or, right in front of the camera. Well, that's not how the brain works in terms of encoding information and recalling information. And then another limitation, I see this in my expert witness work occasionally. Sometimes during a struggle, the camera literally falls on the ground during the struggle, and then it's just pointing up in the air or pointing down at the ground, and you don't see anything anymore. But I found that the audio tracks on the body worn cameras are often more valuable in the case than the video, because on
Mm.
the audio tracks you can hear the words of the officers, you can hear the words of the suspects, you can hear bystanders if there are any, you can hear the sounds of the struggle, you can hear the fear in the officer's voice if he's being attacked, you can hear if the officer's out of breath. So the audio part of the body worn cameras are very important. Other issue with body worn cameras is they're not the only game in town. There's security cameras, there's bystander cell phone cameras, there's news helicopter cameras sometimes. All of these provide different information about the incident. I give you an example. In the George Floyd incident, there were several body worn cameras. You didn't see those in the media, but all the officers had body worn cameras on. I was expert in the case. I saw all the evidence, including all the camera angles and everything like that. There was the famous bystander cell phone camera, which is the one the media just showed over and over again. All it showed you was the one officer, Chauvin, kneeling on the neck and shoulder area of George Floyd. It didn't even show the two other officers that were on the side of the SUV holding down his legs and his butt. There's a big myth. I'll give you an example of camera limitations. People think cameras show the be all and end all of the incident. It's not. George Floyd matter. You've got the one officer kneeling on the neck and shoulder area. Okay. It and there's a big myth out there that there's body weight on George Floyd. And I go a great extent in the book here to detail the true facts that turn out there was never any weight on George Floyd's back, his torso, compressing his lungs, anything like that. The officer that was in the middle had his knee clear down below the butt on the thigh. And the other officer, my officer, Thomas Lane, was just holding down his feet and his ankles from kicking. All right. So there's a myth that the cameras tell the whole story, but
Mm.
people say, "Oh, I saw it on TV. It must be true." So a lot of false rumors came out in that case just because the media didn't show all the camera angles that would prove an entirely different scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, and in regards to the King incident, I read a great book a long while back. Dan Cannon, a former news reporter, documented the officer's flawed training leading up to the night of the Rodney King incident. Do you focus or talk about training in your book, and what can we do to prevent training flaws? Those officers should never have had their batons because they showed a lack of proficiency. I think it was the night before the incident.
Right. Yeah. The book, it was Lou Cannon. And yeah,
Oh,
Lou
Luke Cannon,
Cannon.
right.
He was actually, he had been a reporter and an editor. He is actually President Reagan's biographer.
Hmm.
Interesting guy. I was interviewed by him for his book. And the name of his book, and it's worth reading all these years later, called Official Negligence: How Rodney King and the Riots Changed Los Angeles and the LAPD, by Lou Cannon. It was 1997. I actually quoted from his book in my book, pointing out some of these training problems that he focused on, because we talked about it. The training problem that directly led to the King incident was politicians in Los Angeles outlawed the neck restraints clear back in 1982, and the Rodney King chapter in my book details all that. It shows that even the prosecution's own experts agreed that the officers performed the way they were trained. It was not just some beatdown, which is what the public seems to think. In chapter 7 of my book is a big chapter about training. It's entitled Tactics and Training: We Can Do Better. And basically, there's a big difference in a tactical situation where officers suddenly and unexpectedly faces an imminent threat versus a dangerous but less urgent situation where there's time for the officer to assess the threat, get backup resources, plan, communicate, attempt to resolve the incident without using significant force. Big incident, big difference. Big difference. It's happening right now. I've got to act versus, looks like there's a problem over there. Let me see how I'm going to deal with it and not rush in. So the
Mm.
failure to distinguish between those two situation types sometimes leads to tragedies where suspects or officers or innocent people get hurt or killed. Officers sometimes unnecessarily rush into a situation that requires a more thoughtful approach. That's a big training issue. Gordon Graham is a retired California Highway Patrol captain, and I've known him for decades. He's a well-known police risk manager trainer, and he's one of the founders of Lexipol. He simply says, if you have time to think, use it. And that's the point. Don't rush in. If you have time to think, use your time well. So training has to address both types of situation: the immediate necessity situation where someone's in danger versus, okay, something's happening, but I've got time to plan out how I'm going to respond. Training makes a difference on the street, it has to be challenging and dynamic, stress inducing. You got to put officers through realistic scenarios that replicate the situations that they might actually face on the street. And it's long been a problem in many agencies, and I go in this in detail in my book on the training chapter. The training is stovepiped, we call it. Like today we learn shooting. Tomorrow we learn non-lethal weapon. Next day we learn de-escalation. Next day policy. Next day law. Realistic training forces the officer to integrate all those facets uh, and deal with them at one time. The other thing that is a painful subject is if an officer gets hurt or, God forbid, even killed, and unfortunately, several dozen officers are murdered in the line of duty each year, but there's usually training lessons to be learned. My good friend, and rest in peace, some of your viewers will know his name, Commander Sid Hale, retired from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, great use of force expert. He said years ago, he said, we dishonor the fallen if we don't learn the lessons that would have saved them. So after an incident, we got the investigations need to focus on the officer's training. Questions like, was the officer trained on the subject? How long ago was he or she trained on it? How often were they trained on it? Was it documented? Was the training validated? Did the training adequately prepare the officer for the event? Did the officer follow the training? If he or she deviated the training, why did they? Was the deviation a reasonable deviation because of the circumstances? Was the officer tested on the training? Did the officer adequately explain what he or she did and why? And we know anybody in the business has been there more than 5 minutes know that policy does not always dictate your actions. You have to adapt to the emergency that's in front of you. Training, you try to follow your training, but sometimes you have to deviate from it in order to get the situation controlled as rapidly as possible. That's just the way real life works. So in my training chapter, I try to make these points and suggest these ways for there be better training and protect our officers and protect the public as best we can.
Yeah, yeah. Well, lots to unpack there. I mean, number one, the Lou Cannon, thanks for correcting me on his name, Lou Cannon, the book, Official Negligence. What a great book. And I had the feeling that he was talking to some real cops about it because he had really great information there. And I know there's sometimes a reluctance of cops to talk to reporters, but who else is going to tell them the facts? And if they don't have it, well, who knows where they're getting it from? And then
Yeah, that's
Sid, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I just say, yeah, Luke Cannon did talk to a lot of real cops, real trainers. I was quoted in there 6 or 7 times in his book about use of force issues. Many other law enforcement experts I know were quoted in his book. People that were involved as witnesses in the King case were quoted in his book. So yeah, he got down and dirty in the weeds with police use of force and all the nuances of the Rodney King incident, deeper than anybody else that I've ever seen take that subject on. He did a masterful job on it.
Absolutely. Even the aftermath. I mean, if you're only thinking that details what happened before and during, he goes into several months, the trial of the officers, the LA riots afterwards,
Oh yeah.
the awful tactical decisions that were made,
Yep.
not to carry gear in the cars or have it available because of the optics of it. And I mean, I think we could learn from those lessons. And you point out Sid Heel, what a great guy. He was a mentor to me. I've had the opportunity to go to several of his trainings, and I've had him on Policing Matters.
Oh, good.
He's in the archives. We talked about his book on the use of force and less lethal force. He has a great book on that.
Yes,
So
he does.
yeah. So, I mean, gosh, I mean, so many young cops can learn from people like Greg Meyer and Sid Heel and all the other experts. And oftentimes, some of these incidents that we could learn from are left in the past, and we really should use them. I got to thank you again for, continuing your efforts to help cops learn from past incidents, help educate the public and the media as well. Thanks for being on the show, Greg Meyer. And where can we find your book?
There's the book. It's right here. Reach out, Jim, and grab it. Hard Cases, Police Use of Force in America is on Amazon. That's
Yeah.
where it is.
All right. Well, great insight. Again, appreciate it. And thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks, Jim. It's a great show. I enjoyed it. Be
All
well.
right. Thank you. All right. Hey, to our listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you get a chance to check out the book, Hard Cases, Police Use of Force in America. I mean, there are lessons to be learned in each of those cases. We shouldn't, keep repeating these mistakes, and we only learn from them from this kind of an effort by a great veteran of the LAPD. Drop me a line. Let me know what you think about today's show at policingmatters@policeone.com. Let me know what you think. All right, stay safe. Thanks for checking in, and I hope to talk to you again real soon. Take good care.